Alright, so today I'm going to show you how to do the dispersion effect in Photoshop. Looking at my layers here, you can see that I have a color fill layer. I have hidden my layer 1 because I can actually get rid of that when I'm all done. I have a Liquify layer and a dispersion layer. I have to spell that right. And these two layers both have layer masks on them. This one has a blank layer mask, and then this one has a cutout of your subject. Okay, this is the Liquify layer. We're going to warp our subject, make it look all warpy and stretch it out. And then this one is going to hide that effect, but we're going to use the brushes to create this effect. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these layers and show you how I did this. So the first thing I do is I cut out my subject. You do not have to cut out your subject. I'm just going to show you the basic way to do this to start with. So it works great on a picture that is on a blank or background that doesn't have much going on. So you can cut it out, which I have already done. You guys know how to do that. Then I'm going to add a solid color background layer. I'm just going to keep it white. I'm going to drag that to about the bottom of my layer stack. The next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and create let's just create one duplicate layer. All right, so we just have two. This one we're going to rename Liquify, and this one we are going to name Dispersion. All right. So on this layer, I'm going to go ahead and create a blank layer mask. So I'm going to click on layer mask, and I actually want it to be black. So mine came over white. So what I'm going to do is click on my layer mask and do Control I, and that will inverse my layer mask color. Okay. On this one, I'm going to go ahead and select my subject. So make a selection around him, and I'm going to add a layer mask. Okay, so now I have a layer mask with him cut out. So on this layer, what I'm going to do is click on the thumbnail image, and then I'm going to go to Filter, and I'm going to go to Liquify. This is going to take me into the Liquify panel. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Forward Warp tool. And what Liquify does, it stretches, it deforms your subjects. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the first one's already defaulted selected, so Forward Warp. And I'm just going to click and drag and pull and completely distort this image. Okay, so I'm just pulling these pixels and spreading them all over my document. So depending on how far you want to go with your effect is going to be how far you pull your pixels. So I'm going to continue this process and just stretch it. If you want to go all the way to the edge, that's totally fine. You can do that depending on which direction you want your effect to go. That's the way you're going to be pulling those pixels. So I'm just going to keep pulling until I get all of the pixels. So you might have to go over a couple times, and that's okay. And if you need to come back in after you're done and pull some more pixels in different directions or add pixels because you're missing stuff, you can do that as well. All right, so it's not even going to look like the same thing when you're done. Okay, when I'm all done, I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And if I hide my top layer and disable my layer mask, this is what it's going to look like. Okay, so enable that, turn this back on. Okay, so on this layer, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a paintbrush. So I want to use, the ones that I chose were under the special effects brushes. And these are good because it just kind of looks like splatter brushes, which is totally fine. And I'm going to use this one, the first one, Kyle Splatter Brushes, Splatter Bot Tilt. And what I'm going to do is go into my settings for that brush, and I'm going to uncheck a couple of things. I'm going to uncheck shape dynamics and uncheck scattering. Actually, let's keep scattering. Okay, yeah, let's uncheck shape dynamics, and let's see how that looks when I, everything else can be checked. Scattering, dual brush, buildup, and smoothing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close that out. The next thing, I'm on my Liquify layer mask, and what I'm going to do with a white brush is I'm just going to start clicking. Okay, so because I left scatter it's going to start scattering everywhere. So I'm going to actually go back in and turn that off. All right, and let's see what happens when I do that. Okay, so now I have more control of where my brush goes when I turn off scattering. Okay, so I'm just going to start clicking. If you drag, you're going to get that effect that it looks like you drug your brush across. Okay, so if you don't want that look, then just click. Okay, don't drag, just click. In random spots, just start clicking. There's no right or wrong way to do this, but if you want that look to look like it's being pulled in that direction, then you can click and drag. Okay, so keep in mind, it's going to go in the direction that you're pulling. And because we're on a layer mask, if you pull too much, you can always switch your brush back to black and just come back in here and click, and it'll hide some of those pieces. Okay, so the further out you get, you don't want quite as many because you kind of want it to look like it's fading off into the background. All right, so you're going to repeat that process until you get it how you like it. You can spend plenty of time on this. I want you to take your time. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is, where did my layer panel go? I'm going to go onto my dispersion layer that I created my layer mask on, and I'm going to switch my brush. Actually, it is already black, so on my layer mask, I'm going to start clicking on Spider-Man, and I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. A good tip for this is to go through as you're doing this and resize your brush as you're doing it. So make it smaller, make it larger, and that way not everything is going to look the same. And again, if you're pulling, you want to pull in the same direction. Okay, so this is going to pull those pieces away, so it looks like those pieces are kind of dispersing from him. All right, so you're going to repeat that process until you get it how you like it. And again, you're working on layer masks, so if you have too much or you pull too much in one area, you can always go back and fix it and replace. Okay, so you're going to continue that process and then just clean it up, come in here and, you know, make it look nice and neat. And obviously I wouldn't have all of these up here because there's nothing pulling from. All right, and that is it. I have posted a folder with some examples in Google Classroom, so take a look at those. You can get pretty creative. You can do this with shape brushes as well. I've seen some with like doves and birds. If you go to Google Classroom, I do have, let me pull up that folder that I shared with you guys. I do have some examples that I posted. So let's see. Did I post the bird example? Maybe I did not. I will go ahead and add that bird. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this was a bird brush. So this is actually a pretty cool effect. All right, so just instead of using a scatter brush, you use the bird brush. All right, so when you are all done, make sure to save your file, save the Photoshop document into your Student U drive in a new folder titled Dispersion Effect. Save the Photoshop document as well as the PDF and get that turned in.